Star Wars The Force Unleashed launched almost 14 years ago. So why am I reviewing it now? Well, it's also a game that's re-releasing in 2022, and looking at the trailers, if we're honest, the re-release looks about identical. Of course, remasters can come with more than just a new coat of paint, but regardless of whether the Switch version ends up being different from the original or not, I thought it'd be fun to give a review. So without further ado, let's get into it. In this review, we're going to go through a quick introduction, we're nailing this, who I am, the first 4 hours, the next 40 hours, some changes I'd like to see in the remake, my overall thoughts, and a quick summary. So who am I? Star Wars is probably my oldest nerddom. I've watched all the movies more times than I can count, and I've played more of the games than I can remember. Star Wars The Force Unleashed is one of my fondest memories on my original Xbox 360. So with all that bias in mind, let's jump back in time 14 years and have a quick look at some of the trailer so we can see what this game originally promised. And while we're there, let's admire how far we've come in just 14 years. The first 4 hours. Honestly, if you were gunning for it, you could finish this game in the first 4 hours. Actually, let me check. Yep, no mission skip speedrun, record is just over 1 hour. From memory, when I first picked up this game on Steam about 10 years ago, I finished the game, DLCs and all, in about 6 to 7 hours while still gunning for the majority of the collectibles, which holds true to my experience over the last week. Even if you're taking the time to 100% every level as you play, you're not likely to have a lot of the main storyline left after the 4 hour mark, and there's not much more to the game than the main storyline. So let's quickly chat about it. I'm not going to give you a full recap of what happens, nor will I spoil where the story ends, but I will tell you about the general experience of it. Going through the journey of Starkiller is honestly not as fun as I remember. Maybe my modern expectations of gameplay were just so undersold I couldn't get into it, but we'll cover gameplay shortly. Though I suspect it's more that the story doesn't hold to the passage of time. It's a simple tale of bad guy kills progressively harder good guys to prove himself to big bad guy before being betrayed by big bad guy, then killing the bad guys because he wants to be a good guy, and then going back to big bad guy and there being a predictable twist at the end. Growing up, I remember being absolutely obsessed with this story and its characters, and at least from a storytelling perspective, I'm not really sure why. Don't get me wrong, the story is fun, but it's certainly not amazing by any means. But what about the gameplay? Well, if you were paying attention about a minute ago, you might have a spoiler for that one too. I'm sure you'll be very surprised if I start by saying that the gameplay doesn't feel modern. Let me tell you about some of the things I found. Invisible walls everywhere. Also lots of tiny bumps or just dead bodies that you can't get over. Objects highlighting as interactable, but no combination of movements and buttons will let them interact. Attacks and thrown objects not going near the target that you're obviously aiming for. Hitboxes also don't really seem to be a thing on some enemies. On that, the combat system really feels like a joke. Most combos do nothing if you're even slightly off perfect aim, which is already hard enough to do. If you're trying to use your lightsaber for melee, enemies will lock blades with the most ridiculous things. Like, are you really expecting me to believe that this dude's bone club can hold its own against a lightsaber? In this very same mission, there's a cutscene where a bunch of the same enemy with the same weapon back down just because you ignite your lightsaber. So which is it? Can they block it with ease, or are they completely hopeless against it? Staying on Felucia, I was trying to get past this mob of Felucians. Yeah, I know they've been retconned, that's no longer what a Felucian looks like. And you'd paralyze them with Force Lightning, and while they're mid-paralyzation animation, they'd change to block if you went to try and attack them, and that makes no sense. Speaking of blocking, on the player's end, it doesn't really work most of the time. You also can't interrupt another action to try and block, so if you're halfway through an attack or a movement or anything, you're just going to get hit. Back to combos and aiming for a minute, you actually can't redirect your combos. So if you start an attack in one direction and kill that enemy, or more likely the game has you as slightly off target so you're not actually attacking anything, you can't just continue with a change of direction. You have to stop, wait for an internal cooldown, hope you're not hit, change your direction, and then you can try again. This can be really difficult because very often, buttons won't work. You'll be pressing jump, block, attack, or whatever, and the character just doesn't do anything. I even booted up some other games to test with my controller, but none of them seem to show the same problem, at least not within about 10 minutes of gameplay testing anyway. In fact, so often through this game, I'd just be sitting there mashing the button to move, dodge, block, or anything, and my character would just do nothing. Wait to get hit, fall down, get up, repeat. Buttons not working also doesn't help that there are a lot of mandatory QuickTime events. I suppose to be fair, the button mashing did work during the QuickTime events, usually. but quick time events for me are also just an instant fail. I've always hated them with a passion, and these are absolutely no different. You might also notice that the camera looks locked on some of these boss fights, and that's because, despite being an open camera game, they lock it during a boss fight. Boss fights in general also just felt terrible. It's like being stuck in a Super Smash Brawl fight where the other player can become invulnerable and still attack at the same time. Don't get me wrong, Smash Bros has its place in my game library, but it feels very out of place after having free camera access for the rest of the game. And any type of game that gives you bosses that can ignore your block, that cannot be blocked, that ignore your attacks and can attack all at once is just a loss in my book. Speaking of losses, a lot of scenes got lost. Let me play you some actual unedited recordings from my gameplay.
I'm inside.
Be careful.
Give me some credit, Master. I have one module you've never seen. An enemy I've studied for years.
Just to be clear, I'm not holding a 14-year-old game accountable for not being up to graphical standard or even for poor rendering and load screen times. I'll save that for the re-release. But having sounds line up and scenes not cut themselves short, or at least feeling like they sync with the gameplay, is something one of the biggest companies in the world should have been able to achieve. I'm not too sure if this is just how games were 10 to 20 years ago and I don't remember it, or if this is an outlier. But I plan on reviewing at least one older game per month, so if you want to find out with me, be sure to subscribe and one day we might find the answer. But despite all that, I soldiered through my first playthrough and onto the 40-hour mark for this review. And if I'm honest, it wasn't all quite as bad as this may make it sound. Okay, cut the music there, I don't want to get a copyright strike. The next 40 hours. This game would not be playable to 40 hours if it weren't for the ability to truly unleash the Force. From enough Force Lightning to shock an entire room, to pushing 24 guards at once and Force Repulse, easily one of the coolest Force abilities ever seen in a video game, blowing up everything around you. This game really lets you vent all your violent Sith Lord fantasies in the most destructive way possible. And it's a truly magical feeling. So you may be wondering why complain about all the other stuff if this is clearly how the game is meant to be enjoyed. Well, that's because the unfortunate answer is, that's the way the game's designed. From the start of the game, your force powers are considerably quite weak. Throw 3 objects and you're done, better sit down and take a break. But that's okay, right? Just build up EXP, max out your force meter. Well, even if you ignore all other stats and just max out force, by the time you get there, half the enemies resist your force push anyway, and the other half are just completely immune. But that's no problem for an up-and-coming Sith Lord, right? We'll just hit them with Force Lightning! No, wait, we don't unlock that for a couple of missions, and then when we do, half the enemies will be resistant to it anyway. But what about Force Repulse? Coolest ability in the game, right? Yeah, it is. But like Force Push, it takes a toll on even a maxed out Force meter, and while it's pretty good when you unlock it, it starts to lose its kick pretty quick. Lightsaber throw, Force choke, Force bombs, lightning dash, a goddamn Force lightning shield. This game absolutely killed it when it came to creating fun abilities to play with, but unfortunately it also killed those when they made their enemies. Don't get me wrong, video games should be challenging, but not at the cost of negating all the cool features and abilities you put in there for the player to enjoy. The only real way to enjoy all these skills is to finish the game, max out all your stats, then go back to the start of the game where the enemies don't resist everything and you can just do a traditional wipe them out. Fun as that is, a couple of missions on repeat don't really make for great value. As for the rest of the game's replayability, honestly, the DLCs are fantastic. Story-wise, I loved playing the alternative timelines. Even if they were a little short, it was a brilliantly entertaining hour, one I actually played on repeat a couple of times. Beyond that, it's pretty rough. Yeah, you can hunt down all the collectibles, but it just doesn't feel as rewarding as some games make it feel. Finding a lot of these felt more like a chore than fun gameplay or out-of-the-way puzzles. What about unlocking all the endings? Honestly, I'd rather watch them on YouTube instead of playing through the story again and again and again. Don't get me wrong, this game has its moments. Particularly when you find Sith holocrons, which are essentially mini cheats that last 20 seconds and can give you, among other things, when you unlock these glowing Illuminati pyramids, it really feels like you can unleash the Force in a way the rest of the game just fails to do. Let me try and explain. Normally when you play this game, you need to know the enemy's resistance and typing. Now I don't just mean Force or Lightning, I mean you need to know which of the dozens of combos and abilities work, because the rest of them probably don't. But when you pick up this unlimited Force collectible, you can truly just blow everything up, and if it's still there, button mash until something dies. Giant Slenderman trooper? No problem. Fly him until the Banthas come home. Big munching creature that can survive lightsaber to the foot? All good, just blow up in its face a few times and throw your glow stick at him until he gets food poisoning. Annoying boss battle? Hold them in the air until they die. What are they gonna do? Run out of air on you? A giant Imperial Walker? Walker go boom. There is no limits to your power. You are finally, truly unleashing the Force for about 20 seconds. And after that, the game feels pretty limited again. So assuming that this trailer is accurate and up to date and there's no graphical update for the Switch, here are some things I would like to see changed on a new release. Changes I want to see in the Switch version. No more invisible walls and tiny bumps that stop you moving, and no more interactables that are just too slow to interact with. Better hitboxes and aiming, particularly the aiming. I mean, sometimes I would literally be standing on top of an enemy and the game couldn't figure out that maybe that's what I wanted to target. Removal of mandatory QuickTime events to kill and finish certain enemy types. An option like Fallen Order to just turn this off would be a fantastic way to preserve the original intention, but remove it for those who, like me, despise this type of mechanic. Freely move the camera during a boss fight. Better combat. More than just aiming, from blocking and maybe even a dodge roll or strafe, something to get offline when things are flying at you. Actually, if we're being honest, a full rework of how combat in this game works would really be needed if Nintendo's going to justify its usual $80 to $90 price tag. Also, some of the small things like costumes staying between levels. As it stands, when you load in, the game puts on the default costume for that level, even if you've gone through and picked out a different character or costume. The saber options you pick also don't apply in cutscenes. This is something that should really be updated. I'd also love it if they brought back the unlimited Force cheat from the Generation 2 consoles. This was something that was in the original release but wasn't brought to the Generation 3 consoles or PC. I get it, you want us to play the game as you intended, but also let us break it in some fun ways. Let us have the experience of truly unleashing the Force through the whole game, not just 20-second moments once per level. By the way, if you do want to see how different the Switch version ends up actually being, let me know in the comments and I'll be sure to cover it in a review when it releases later this year. My overall thoughts. I wanted to like this game. I really did. It's a special piece of my childhood which I've rather ruined in replaying it. Something I hope doesn't happen when I get around to the Force Unleashed 2. But I just didn't get the entertainment out of it that I needed, or certainly not enough to justify the price tag this game has. I feel like the game's limited gameplay really subtracts from the wonder that should be the Star Wars world. I mean, the things you do, the places you see in this game, exploring the inside of a Sarlacc pit, starting the rebellion, diving through the middle of space through an unconstructed Death Star, bringing down an entire Star Destroyer, arguably the most impressive show of power a Force user has ever committed. This should feel like a spectacular moment, but the mechanics really make it feel like a chore. This is sped up but uncut footage of that moment from my initial playthrough. Trying to grab TIE fighters with a grab function that works 30% of the time, trying to fling objects at TIE fighters with a fling function that works even less, moving the thumbsticks to the right spot and waiting for the game to register you're in the right spot before you can move them in a slightly different spot for a few seconds before more TIE fighters appear to start firing at you. And repeat. I actually ended up just standing there letting the fighters fire on me until the last second in hope the Star Destroyer would get low enough to trigger the cutscene and I wouldn't have to endure another round. But despite all that, possibly the biggest issue of this game releasing on Switch will be its runtime. In games like Mass Effect and Skyrim, the amount of time it takes you to finish the game is irrelevant. There's not only so much outside the main questline in those games, but so many different paths and opportunities that their replayability just becomes second to none. That's the type of value I expect when I end up paying Nintendo money for a game. Not necessarily the replayability of the story, but enough content that $90 isn't expended in just a few hours, and in this game, it is. In summary, did I enjoy this game? It's complicated. I enjoyed parts of it. The moments where I could really unleash the Force, total euphoria. But the rest of the game? The bosses, the story, the lackluster design, it all felt like a chore to play, and when I get time to play games, I want enjoyment, not chores. In the end, this game is currently $30 on Steam, and if we're generous, it's probably about 8 hours of gameplay. And that's gameplay that you might not even find fun. However, I've also seen this game go on sale for up to 80% off, bringing it down to just $6. And at less than the price of a movie ticket or most nights out, it might just have an argument to join your library. It's not a strong argument, but it's an argument all the same. Hello and thank you for watching this far. If you enjoyed that, or if you're looking for more Star Wars content, LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga is going to be here in just over a month, and I am really excited. Obviously I'm going to be popping out a review on YouTube, but I will also be doing a live playthrough on Twitch. So if you're keen to check that out, please head over at the link below, give me a follow, I really appreciate it, and I'll see you on the next one.